Well, for certain, I say they do
All right, good afternoon, everyone. I want to get started right on time because this is going to be a great discussion and we want to allow enough time for the presentations and for questions. We have some that we've created as a board, but we're also going to have any ones that you bring forward intermixed with our questions as well. If you want to do that, there are forms on the table, just fill it out, and then I will be coming around and collecting them and giving them to a couple of other board members. So to get started, my name is Laura Spiro. I am the current president of the Springfield City Club. We're honored today to present this presentation with the League of Women's Voters of Lane County, and Nancy will introduce herself here in a minute. A couple housekeeping things. Besides the questions, we also have a form if you want to get on our email list. Just put your name and email on this and we'll make sure you get all future notifications about our presentations. We do presentations the first and third Thursday of the month, and then you will have an automatic knowing what that upcoming presentation is about. If you're interested in joining the Springfield City Club, we also have a form on the table. You can fill that out, we'll collect it, and then somebody will follow up with you afterwards. I would like the rest of the board members to raise their hands just so you identify them in the room. And our secretary, Len, is recording and broadcasting this presentation on Zoom, and then the recording will be up on our Facebook page after the presentation and our website. So Nancy is going to introduce herself, talk a little bit about the process. And then I'll do a quick introduction of our two speakers, and then we'll get started. Nancy.
So I'm Nancy Mills from the League of Women Voters, as you know, and we're absolutely delighted with this partnership with the Springfield City Club. It's really beneficial for us and hopefully it's for the City Club. So as you probably know, the League of Women Voters is a nonpartisan American nonprofit political organization which was founded in 1920, and its major activities are ones that involve elections, so registering voters, providing voter information, boosting voter turnout, and advocating for voting rights. And I want to emphasize the fact that we're nonpartisan, which means we do not we do not promote a candidate, and in the education part of it, which is this, we present both sides so that the information is reliable. Now, I'm the chair of voter services, and with that hat on, I need to say something about elections. And the most important thing about the upcoming election is what's happening with the post office. And you may very well know this, but our mail is no longer postmarked in at our local post office or in Eugene and Springfield. It's trucked to Portland, which means that if you drop it off in a mailbox on election day, it's not going to be postmarked with the date of election day, and it is not going to count. So the league is recommending that you vote a week in advance if possible, or use a drop box, one of the official drop boxes. In theory, you can go to the post office and you can get it hand stamped, but I wouldn't rely on that. I think the lines might be longish. So anyway, so that's the league stuff. And let me talk with you about the process. So all questions must be submitted in writing and handed to a Springfield City Club board member, and Zoom attendees have an option to submit via the chat box. Each speaker will make a presentation of 12 to 15 minutes. My bet is on the 15 minutes. The first speaker will be Rob Dickinson for the proponents, and Tiffany Edwards will speak after that for the opponents. I will read the questions, and each speaker will get 2 minutes. That's what we've decided now, 2 minutes for a response, and each one will get that. So each person will have a chance to respond to each question. And we have a timekeeper, Patty Sandos from the league, and it's amazingly good at keeping us in track. So, at about 12:50, each speaker will be given 4 minutes for closing summary. And this time Tiffany will go first, followed by Ron. So I thank you all for participating, and,
I'll do a quick introduction of our two speakers and then we'll get started. So Rob Dickinson, I'm not gonna read their full bios. If you wanna read that, they're on our website. I think Len emailed it out ahead of time, so just real quick. After a career in software development, he has dedicated his time and energy to community volunteering, civic work focused on protecting the environment, building strong and healthy communities, and supporting vulnerable populations. Tiffany Edwards is the Vice President of Policy and Community Development with the Eugene Area Chamber of Commerce and has a background in advertising, public policy, and communications. So with that, we invite Rob to come up and start his presentation.
All right, well, thank you for letting me speak to you. I really appreciate the opportunity. Who are we, the proponents of this measure? Protect Lane County Watershed, which is now organized as the Yes on Measure 20-373 campaign, was formed to advance a citizen initiative to secure legal rights for watersheds and clean water. We're a group of dedicated Lane County residents who believe it is our right and our responsibility to protect our waters from harmful corporate activity. What we're going to talk about today is what are watersheds. It's Watershed Bill of Rights, so that's what's important. What is Measure 20-373, the Lane County Watershed Bill of Rights? Why was this measure brought forward? Why should we care about our watersheds and their health? What our critics are saying and our responses. Here are some of the three key messages that I want you to take away from my talk and hopefully from today's presentation. The status quo is unacceptable. Our watersheds, our health, and our economy deserve better. Measure 20-373 is good law, and it's an important step towards protecting our future. And sadly, that the opposition is working hard to cultivate fear and to dissuade voters from voting yes, and those claims don't hold up, and we're going to talk about that today. What are watersheds? Watershed means the water, the land area that drains rain, snow, groundwater into a single outlet, such as rivers and creeks, the wetlands, aquifers, and so forth. It's what it looks like. You can basically divide up the area of Lane County into multiple different watersheds. We have there's more than 5 watersheds: the Coast Fork, Middle Fork, McKenzie, the Long Tom, the Scioto, and some smaller watersheds. And each watershed will have different water bodies, rivers, and cities within there. So the Lane County Watershed Bill of Rights, what is it? Okay, this law is a rights-based initiative that provides legal protection for nature by giving rights to our watershed. It's a prospective Lane County law that would protect the various watersheds in Lane County, and it would protect our residents as well. Over 14,000 Lane County residents signed a petition to put this measure on the ballot, and that says that voters want clean water. It's a simple ordinance, just like all other laws in Lane County, and it's subject to revision by the Lane County Board of Commissioners. So it gives legal rights for Lane County watersheds, the right to exist, flourish, regenerate, and evolve. It gives rights to Lane County residents, the right to clean water. And importantly, it protects against harmful corporate and government activities that would infringe upon those rights or violate our right to healthy watersheds and clean water. It has provisions so that the government, Lane County, and or residents can enforce that. Our view is that the government should enforce it, but we have the ability for residents to take action if the government isn't doing its job. And it also says that Lane County, the local government, should adopt protective measures when there is a great risk of harm to the watersheds or our residents that needs addressing. The polluters must pay damages that are proportionate to restoring what is harmed back to its pre-harm state. And finally, there's protections for whistleblowers. So if somebody is working in government or a company and they find evidence of violation, they're able to report that without losing a job. So why was this measure brought forward? Okay, so it's about the human cost of industrial forestry and resource extraction at all costs. It's about watersheds not being adequately protected now. It's also because the climate crisis exacerbates the threats to water. And finally, that our inadequate watershed protections exacerbate the climate crisis. Our health, our economy, and our future demand that we act now to ensure healthy watersheds and ecosystems. What is the human cost of the status quo? Clear-cut logging and aerial pesticide spraying are literally killing people in our counties. The risk is real. The harms have been happening for 50 years unabated. It sounds hyperbolic, but it's true, and I'll give you some examples. People get sick, they lose their livelihoods, they die, or live. This initiative is not the first step. In fact, it comes after nearly every available other option has been tried. Here's a little bit of information on some of the health harms of what's going on right now in our watersheds. And a lot of where our group came from is people who have been harmed by aerial pesticide application. People where they clear-cut logs and they come back through from years afterwards and with helicopters spray herbicide, they get into people's bodies and get into the watersheds too. Pesticides contribute to a wide variety of diseases: cancer, reproductive harm, birth defects, liver, kidney, other organ damage, nervous system or neurological disease, general poor health or morbidity, and premature death, mortality. And as this slide shows, pesticides pose a greater risk to children than to adults. And here's a picture of a clear-cut log right behind the Triangle Lake School. And when they do that, they're going to come back through and spray pesticides right near those children. In fact, we watched the spray notifications, and there have been sprays that are close to schools, and then drift is going to happen. And our team, people we work with, have been right there in the front lines of experiencing these harms. So the lead, we had a measure before that was to ban aerial spraying. The lead chief commissioner for our aerial spray initiative died of a cancer she attributed to having been sprayed. The chief petitioner for a Josephine County aerial spray ban initiative also died of a cancer she attributed to having been repeatedly sprayed. One of my colleagues had 10 miscarriages as a result of chemical trespass. Another former colleague now has Parkinson's disease. A family of 4 in Triangle Lake, right not far from probably where that spray happened. All 4 of her family members were exposed to atrazine. They tested positive in their systems, even her children. They were sick for months. A neighboring farmer where I live in Cottage Grove in rural Lane County had some of her animals die and damage to her crops. There are countless stories of this. We actually have packed the county commissioners meeting many times with 50, 60 people telling gut-wrenching stories. I wish you could hear it. It's probably on tape. You could hear it. There's a book, Bitter Fog. It talks about the experience primarily in Lincoln County, but it talks about how whole communities have been devastated and people, all of the pregnant women in one area lost their children during one season. And it's a great book. It also talks about a lot of the falsities of the safety protocols. Aerial pesticide spraying. We know herbicides are extremely toxic to people, plants, and animals. Drift from spray kills crops and plants. Pets and livestock have been sickened and died. Drinking water supplies can be contaminated. Wild animals are also sickened, and that could be a hazard to hunters and other people for recreation. Toxic chemicals can drift for miles and end up in streams, over homes, over crops, people, livestock, and many unintended victims of chemical trespass. And it just goes without saying, toxins sprayed in the watershed ultimately end up in the water. This slide shows some of what happens to animals, but like wild animals in particular, like birth defects have been shown in deer and other animals. We talk to hunters. Hunting and fishing is a big thing in Lane County, but hunters have found, taken deer, find they have gross tumors on them. And that's not something that used to happen before all these practices. I don't know if I have time to see some of these vignettes, but there's some stories like a 44-year-old mother who died after having sprayed, where she ended up with terrible conditions as a result. Another family where their baby ended up with breast milk was tested for chemicals and there was TCDD. The number of these stories we have is long. We don't have time for it, but you should know about them. So why do we care about watersheds? Okay, so healthy watersheds, they provide a lot of things to us in our community that are essential for both social, environmental, and economic well-being. Things like nutrient cycling, carbon storage, erosion control, sedimentation control, biodiversity, water storage and filtration, flood control, soil formation, wildlife corridors, for humans, jobs, income, recreation, food, health and nutrition, fire protection, cooling, and basically our quality of life depends on a healthy watershed. These are what we call ecosystem services. Talking about like what happens when we clear cut log, there's a lot going on with the climate crisis. We're seeing more and more 90-degree days. We're going to see more 100-degree days. You know, in February, we were having lots of really nice days. Today is one of them in March. But it's not all nice when we have extreme climate change. When we clear cut log in the forest, we're going to cut down our stream flow by 50% because of the loss of trees and the canopy that would protect the ground and the water. This is a slide that shows what's going to be happening in terms of scarcity of clean water and fresh water into the 40s. The dark is not good. That means when it's reduced 40 to 50%. There's studies showing that America's rivers are alarmingly underprotected against various kinds of harm. I think the figure is 80% of our waters are inadequately protected. There is, in this one study said, there is an urgent need for policies that safeguard, strengthen, and expand freshwater protections to secure rivers that sustain both people and nature. Here's what the status quo means for heightened wildfire risk. Tree plantations, this is not forest, this is not natural forest. Tree plantations, which are different than mature forest, they catch fire more easily, they burn hotter and faster. Healthy watersheds and mature forest increase our resiliency to wildfire. In one of these reports, the Douglas Fire Complex, intensive plantation forestry characterized by young forests and spatially homogenized fuels were a significant driver of higher wildfire severity. Our study clearly demonstrated that the history of historical and current forest management practices for timber production contributes more to increased wildfire risk. The climate crisis demands watershed protection. We know from studies and economic data that the largest single source of greenhouse gases in Oregon is timber, with a 35% share of the total. We also know that it affects our economy and our jobs. New research shows climate-related heat temperatures in the U.S. have already shrunk U.S. salaries by 12%. And the global water crisis is now. According to the Global Commission on the Economics of Water, demand for fresh water will outstrip supply by 40% by 2030. National security agencies around the world are taking this as a threat to all of our livelihoods, and they're looking for what to do. As a result, half of the world's food production will be at risk of failure in the next 25 years. The most important lever we have for protecting ourselves and our communities is water protection. Status quo is bad for our economy. Timber represents a small and decreasing share of the state's economic output. Statewide, only about 8,000 jobs. But it also creates significant risks to our health, our safety, and our economy. There's health impacts of clear-cut logging, especially the aerial spraying, but also when you have these wildfire smoke, that hurts people. Actually, could be a cause of death. And water contamination. But the climate impacts are real too. There's higher wildfire risk. There's also climate-related health effects. Industrial activities in the watershed hurt other strong economic drivers, recreation and tourism. Recent studies show that tourism is far more valuable than logging in terms of economic impact, employment, and annual growth in Oregon. And recreation and tourism, they depend more on a healthy ecosystem and healthy environment. Clean water is good for business. Tourism, fishing, and other recreation, outdoor recreation are main county economic drivers. Over 13,000 jobs, almost 14,000 in Lane County alone, and that's just 4 years ago. That's way more than the statewide timber jobs. And they all depend on healthy ecosystems. Recreation and tourism, not just the jobs in that field, they create amplified economic benefits all throughout our counties. Hotels, motels, and other lodging services gain customers. Restaurants, attractions, and other venues benefit. Shopping and other sales increase because we have visitors coming to our county for our clean and healthy outdoor environment. And there's all kinds of other support businesses that support those restaurants and businesses and tourism. And they all benefit, and they all hurt if we hurt the environment. There's natural product companies that want source materials that are not contaminated by toxins. Mountain Reserves, the company supporting us, they've had to throw out expensive product. They have very high standards for their products, their organic products, because of contamination from spray. Clean water is good for business. Property values are higher near clean rivers and forests. Watershed degradation shifts cleanup costs onto taxpayers and municipalities. And prevention is way cheaper than remediation. I think there was something that says like 27 times cheaper. Measure 20, we're going to get into some of the arguments that the oppositions have. We have to go first, so they're going to say lots of things about our measure. I'll move faster. Thank you. Our law is broad for a reason. It makes it more durable and adaptable. They're going to talk a lot about citizen suits. They're going to say that everybody's going to be suing everybody, but it's not true. Citizen suit provisions exist for a reason to level a very uneven playing field. Lots of laws have that: Clean Water Act, Clean Air Act, Endangered Species Act. It's common and it's there for a reason, because large corporations are very good at denying standing to individuals. It's very hard to win cases, and they're very expensive for anybody to bring them. Regular people don't bring lawsuits. And that's true of all the cases where there has been citizen lawsuits. They do not lead to a large number of cases. The burden is on this suing party to prove harm. It requires evidence of an actual violation, and it requires really scientific expertise. It's not easy, it's not cheap, and it doesn't happen. I'm unfortunately out of time. I'd like to give you some more examples, but maybe later in the questions I'll be able to give you some more. Thank you very much. I enjoyed the chance to talk to you.
Okay. Give me 1 second. Plug in. You want to swap out here. Okay. All right. All right, well, thank you, everybody. And thanks so much for the Springfield City Club and the League of Women Voters for having us here today. And it's a really important conversation. Very much appreciate the invitation. My name is Tiffany Edwards, and I work for the Eugene Area Chamber of Commerce. And with that hat, we are part of the growing coalition of businesses, elected officials, individuals, concerned citizens who have joined our coalition in working to oppose this measure and defeat it in May. And I'm going to talk a little bit about who's part of our coalition and why. And then I'm going to give some more specific information about the specific reasons for the opposition. Essentially, while Oregonians value our natural environment, and we all agree that we must continue to protect Lane County's clean water, this measure is supposed to protect watersheds, but as written, it really means frivolous lawsuits leading to higher taxes, less local government services, fewer jobs, and lower quality of life. And so I want to go through and kind of explain the position of our coalition. A little bit about our coalition. Our coalition represents people from across our community united by a shared belief that Measure 2373 is vague, costly, and too risky for Lane County. And you'll see just a few of the organizations that we've listed on here. You've got both the Eugene and Springfield Chambers of Commerce. Collectively, we represent thousands of businesses in the greater Eugene and Springfield area. I'll just point out a few. Springfield's mayor, Sean Van Gordon, is part of our coalition. We also have former state senator Lee Byers, who represented Springfield in the legislature for a very long time. Eugene City Councilor Randy Groves happens to be the former fire chief for both Eugene and Springfield. And his concerns very much have to do with our ability to protect our communities from wildfire. Excuse me. EWEB Commissioner John Brown, but I'll just mention that the EWEB board voted unanimously to oppose this measure. And then, Willamette Lane Board Member Chris Wig. Chris Wig is a Springfield resident, and he's also very active with the Democratic Party of Lane County. And these are just a few of the folks who, really share our concerns about this measure and the impacts that it would have. We have a more extensive list on the website, protectourcounty.org, so feel free to check that out. I want to just mention a couple of things that some of our members of our coalition have said. This is your mayor's, Sean Van Gordon of Springfield. Measure 2373 raises serious red flags for Springfield. By opening the door to broad science-free litigation against local governments, it would increase legal costs and financial uncertainty. Those costs would inevitably be borne by residents and threaten public core services like public safety. Joy Marshall, many of you may know Joy Marshall. She is a longtime education advocate. She works on a lot of campaigns every season. She's currently working on Eugene's library levy, trying to protect that funding. And these are her words. She's an environmentalist, but she cannot support this measure. It completely denies that we have to balance water needs with personal use, growing food, protecting wildlife, recreation, and our local businesses. It also encourages all kinds of lawsuits that could even be filed against school districts. She's voting no on Measure 2373. And lastly, I'll just mention Faye Stewart, longtime County Commissioner. He's now serving as the director at Lane Electric Co-op. And he's concerned that Measure 2373 exposes essential utilities to endless litigation over everyday operations. Those legal costs don't disappear. They show up in higher rates for rural families and small businesses who can least afford it. We should pursue environmental protection through clear science-based policy, not through a measure that creates uncertainty without real results. So those are just a few of the things that some of the folks from our coalition have said, and so I just wanted to make sure to share that. So what is Measure 2373? It is a countywide ballot measure. It's in Lane County, and it will be on your ballot on May 19th. It would allow any Lane County resident to sue any local government or business on behalf of watersheds or natural communities. So I just want to kind of expand on that a little bit. So local governments, that would include all of our cities, our county, EWEB, University of Oregon, Lane Transit District, school districts, parks districts, like Willamette Lane, nonprofits, those are business organizations. And the organizations that build our affordable housing are definitely subject to the impacts of this measure. It also includes businesses, even sole proprietors. So if you are earning money as a sole proprietor, you are a business entity. Watershed, essentially, and you saw Rob's graph, it applies to the land mass that is Lane County that feed our rivers, our streams, and other bodies of water. So that is all encompassing as far as the, what is included in the watershed. There's no limit on monetary penalties, and the process for assessing damages is not defined. Currently, the way that the language reads is that damages are the cost of restoration to the original, to the pre-impacted state, and plus an additional 1% of that total cost assessed by date. So if you consider how long it may, think of a project, think of something that is subject to this litigation, and the damages are awarded to an entity that is asked to pay those damages, something could take years to restore, and they would be assessed that 1% on a daily basis. The scientific certainty of full evidence of risk is not required for lawsuits. And then also Lane County government is charged with the enforcement of the ordinance. They are also a party to the lawsuits as a government, but there's no funding provided for this task. And so we would expect that you would see an additional cost to the county just in the enforcement. This measure, so I'm just going to go through five points that have kind of come to the surface that and maybe provide some examples to help put some context around this. So this measure would lead to a flood of lawsuits.
It would make it too easy for anyone to sue neighboring businesses or local governments with frivolous lawsuits, even for petty grievances. We see this already today. We know that there are lots of projects in our communities that receive opposition, and we have seen those lawsuits. We see that in housing developments, we see that in transit projects, and we see that in, you know, in other ways that they come into our communities and they cost us money. Those lawsuits are for those challenges, and you think about the land use process and the appeals process that a lot of the development that we face is subject to. There's no limit to what this could cost local governments and taxpayers. There's no process to estimate the damages currently, so it's basically a blank check to whoever files a lawsuit. I mentioned the 1% per day until restoration occurs. In an event that restoration is not going to occur, or maybe something was built and the plan is never to restore anything. We built a housing development or something. That doesn't intend to be torn down and restored to an original state. So, you know, the looming question is kind of what is the assessment on the damages of that? It means higher prices and higher utility bills. Endless lawsuits will cost local businesses who will pass on those higher prices to consumers. And then utility commissioners say that it would lead to a higher water bills for residents. I mentioned that the EWEB board unanimously voted to oppose this measure, and they received a pretty extensive legal analysis, and that was what that was based on. And so, you know, while we aren't subject to have that information, that, you know, these are attorneys that looked at what the impacts could be, and that was the conclusion that was drawn. This measure would force cuts to critical services. At a time when healthcare funding and public safety budgets have already been slashed, we cannot afford any more cuts. We know that the federal government has not been doing us any favors when it comes to helping to support all of the things that we need as communities and the things that we value and the funding that has traditionally supported those things. They have taken those right out from under us. And so we are finding ourselves in a position we are constantly having to try to be creative and ways to continue to provide those essential services that the governments were providing. This directly endangers that by driving up costs to the government, the very governments that would be subject to litigation and the lawsuits that would come through this measure. The costs are just too great. And lastly, I'll just say good public policy should rely on good science. This measure says that no scientific certainty or full evidence of risk is needed to file and win a lawsuit. In the opinion of our campaign, that's ridiculous, and it's not the right way to make laws. We have strict regulations in place. We, as a society, we depend on our governments to make laws. We all get to participate in that process. And those laws are intended to protect our communities, protect our citizens. And it is also the responsibility for everybody to be following these laws. And so I do think that, you know, not just me personally, but I think that the folks that are feel strongly about opposing this measure share that is where that enforcement and those regulations belong in the existing infrastructure that we have with our state, federal, local laws that are already in place. So with that, I'm gonna close and I will take questions, and I guess we're gonna have a Q&A. So thank you.
Well, I thank both of our speakers for informative talks, and I know that we have questions that we are anxious to hear your responses to. The first one is probably directed to Rob initially, but both of the speakers will have an opportunity to speak to each question if they want to. So my first question. We're a moving target.
Yeah, gotta get that. I've heard that before.
So the first question is, how would this measure be implemented in practice, and how would potential violations be identified and addressed? I think that's you.
Can you hear me?
Yes. Yes.
Right, so when this measure passes, it would become a law on the books of Lane County, just like any other law. And the Lane County would then develop whatever procedures for anybody reporting violations. We expect the county to enforce the law. It doesn't mean that if somebody brings forward something frivolous where there's no evidence, they, just like any other violations, code violations, they're not obligated to pursue anything unless there's clear evidence of that. And very much unlike what Tiffany said, the laws for bringing forward cases and proving them is no different than any other law. There's no different standard. They sort of misread that part of it, and I'll get to that later. But basically, the county would be responsible for doing that. They, in any case that is brought forward, whether it's by a resident or by the county, there would have to be, substantial evidence of harm, and that harm would be evaluated on the rights that are in the measure. They said there's no basis for that, for how a harm to be determined. It would be based on looking at those rights that are established for both us as residents or the watersheds themselves, and that would be how we would determine whether both what kind of harm and what kind of damages. To say that the damages are unlimited is really just so speculative and really just trying to induce fear. If there was something that happened that had a small harm, the damages would be small. The only way that the damages would be larger is if there was a significant and set of damages that required extensive evidence and proof.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for the question. I would just respond by explaining that, I think we all understand that where the costs are, where we bear costs when it comes to legal challenges is actually in the whole process. So we see this in land use all the time, and we know that just the simple act of bringing up litigation is where the cost is. Whether that case is ultimately determined to be settled where somebody ends up having to pay the type of damages that potentially they could is not the only place where the cost comes. And so I think that's where the shared concern, specifically with governments, is that they would be having to fight litigation regardless of the outcomes on, in an unknown number of cases, because it applies so broadly to any project, anything that essentially disturbs the ground below it. And that's so many different things, and for so many different reasons, somebody could choose to litigate something like that. So thank you.
So my related question is, how does this measure compare to similar policies or legal frameworks adopted in other jurisdictions, and what lessons can be drawn from those experiences? And whoever wants to talk.
I'll be honest, I'm not aware of a lot of other proposals in other states or other areas. I believe that in Oregon, there was something similar that was deemed to be unconstitutional, but I can't speak directly to that. This is probably slightly different language, regardless. So I think maybe Rob might know more about that.
Sure. Well, thanks. A couple things. Well, for certain of the provisions in here, like the aspect of what's called scientific certainty that they brought up. One, I think they're misreading it. It's not at all applies towards things about having to bring or win lawsuits. It's about the county should adopt preventative measures. That's called the precautionary principle in modern language. Precautionary principle is something that is used, it's a widely used policy framework for managing risk. It's used for almost all environmental laws, and it's in the European Union as well. Like, for example, there are, well, I'll come back to that, but the other aspects of this, for example, starts looking at.
Where, at the reset button.
Yeah.
Precautionary
Yeah,
principle.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, so I have another related question, and that is, how will this legislation comport with provisions of the Federal Clean Waters Act? And, I think I'd like to give it back to you.
Sure. Yeah, that's one of the things that I was actually, I did space out there. I apologize for that. But one of the things in terms of citizen suits, that is a very important measure, a part of our measure, the ability for citizens to bring suit if necessary. That's typically because of the need for having legal standing. But the Clean Water Act exists. It has it has similar things like that. Ours would basically, the Clean Water Act is often different in that it is sort of very much about how many parts per million of a certain kind of chemical should we tolerate getting into our system. Unfortunately, there's significant reasons why all of that testing that determines those parts per million is extremely flawed. And there's a lot, if I have time and there's a question about that, I might come back to that. This is not about the parts per million. It's about really it's trying to get to the real specifics of the goal, which is protecting our communities and our health. And so that's why it's written in a sort of a rights-based mechanism, so that it's asserting that the watershed have a right to exist and to flourish. And then we look at any claims against that as opposed to parts per million. In the same way that the rights for residents have clean water, it's about not the parts per million, but about somebody would have to prove that residents' right to clean water is being harmed. And then where I was really looking for in the last question, where I sort of froze up a bit, was that there are literally hundreds of ecological and rights of nature laws around the country and around the world. And so those are things that we could look to. We've seen from that that it is not true that there are significant numbers of lawsuits. In fact, the opposite problem is true. Basically, when you give an option for somebody to sue, but no one has the obligation to sue, in general, a lot of people, because lawsuits are very time-consuming, expensive, and hard, they look to somebody else to do that. And so that's more the problem than an excess of them.
So I think it's time for Tiffany.
Oh, thank you. I just wanted to respond with something right from the measure itself that I highlighted, because the language reads that as it's been stated, that this grants rights to watersheds and natural communities. That right includes the right of residents to be free from preemption over the rights expressed herein, because the law expands rights protections for people and nature above those provided by less protected state, federal, and international laws. So essentially, the read on this is that it preempts any laws that are currently in place, whether it be state, federal, or international law. And so the question about how it interacts with other laws, according to the language, it would appear that it could preempt any of those.
So my next question is, environmental groups have sued to remove dams and natural river systems. Without those dams, Eugene and Springfield would flood. What in this measure would prevent that? And I think Tiffany first.
That's a really good question, and I agree with the premise of the question. I would have to say the question, how that is one that I think that the concern has come from that, because we truly don't know how that would play out if litigation were to happen. Dam removal is one of those things. Where do you measure the point in which the impact happened? Because I think that was one of the other things that in reading through the measure, there is no date, there is no statute of limitations. So does that mean the state of the dam before it was a dam? Or does that mean the state of the dammed river as it is today? And then removal of a dam would be the change to the ecosystem that would have occurred. So there's just a lot of questions that I personally would have, and I looked through and I didn't see dates or anything that referenced a point in time for which this could apply.
Yeah, it would be for ongoing violations. So like it's for activities that are currently happening in the watershed. So for example, like the aerial spray farm, it is ongoing. We're not talking about things 100 years ago. And in fact, I think Tiffany sort of mentioned that there was something about a 1%, and until restoration was done. It doesn't read that way. It actually says that as long as, it basically until the violating act is stopped. Okay, so like if somebody is continuing to dump toxin in our waterways, once the violation is reported, they have to stop doing that. It's not that if there is a restoration that takes 5 years, it's not that you're going to be penalized for 5 years. So the dam question is a good one, and I really don't have a strong answer for that. But the other thing I'll just point out, we're going to talk about lots of questions where, if we believe this law is strong and it doesn't lead to these consequences that are highly speculative. But in the event that there was a real concern, it is just a law on the books of Lane County like any other law. And it would just take 3 commissioners to amend that if there was some change needed to, like, for example, they could put in there that it doesn't affect dams, if that was the thing. But we don't think that there's a need for modification, but it is a law like any other. Our greatest fear would be that there might be 3 commissioners that would overturn the law. But either way, we think that this measure is very important because it would represent Lane County vote, if it passed, Lane County voters making a strong claim to their government that watersheds deserve a higher level of protection. And that in itself is a very important thing for public policy.
Thank you. So, potentially a related question, how might this measure intersect with other community property priorities such as housing, community resiliency, for example, wildfire mitigation, new water treatment projects, public health, economic development, etc. So Rob, you're up.
Well, sure. I didn't have enough time to really get into it, but the economic impacts are important. I mean, if we continue on the status quo, there is a significant risk to our economy. You guys have a lot of speakers. We would really encourage you to bring in a natural resource economist named Ernie Nemi. He's given talks recently, like the Public Interest Environmental Law Conference. And one of the things he shows in significant detail is that the status quo, where we're continuing to clear cut log our trees, is dramatically harming our economic and health future. Okay, that's both in climate impacts, wildfire impacts. The economists can figure out what the social cost of certain activity is. For every log truck that we bring in, it brings in a small number of thousands of dollars, but it actually impacts our county with a social cost that's dramatically higher. And we also feel that much of our economy revolves around having a healthy environment, recreation, tourism. And as we continue, like I live in Cottage Grove, we have a large cycling ride that comes through. How many hundreds of cyclists want to come through a place with all kinds of clear cut like devastation that's nearby? And then the health impacts. When people get sick, how many people know somebody who has Parkinson's? I think a lot of people do. And that's directly linked to pesticide exposure, and in particular to repeated and long-term exposure and exposure to multiple different things. I'll stop there.
Thank you. Thanks for the question. I think your question actually is specifically the concern that the opposition sees, the impact specifically to those other community values and priorities, housing, transportation, and any project that, any road project, any transit project, anything that alters our environment is subject to this type of litigation. I mentioned that the former fire chief of Springfield and Eugene has grave concerns about the ability to protect our communities from wildfire, because it is not possible to protect us from wildfire without impacting the environment, whether it be through fire suppression measures, or even, work that's done in the forest to help and remove some of those fuels that end up being problematic during fire season. And those are all things that we actively have to do to help protect our communities, and those things could be subject to litigation under this measure in the way that it's been written.
I have a question. I have a half a minute left. Could I use that now?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, sure. So just wanted to come back to the wildfire question, because, one of the things that our measure is really seeking to do is to address wildfires. So because, again, when we clear cut log, we create greater risk of wildfire. We also create greater risk of particulate matter and smoke, and that's a health hazard. But if mature forests are much more resilient, and these tree farms are much more likely to catch and burn. So if we really care about wildfires, we will do more to protect our watershed. Thanks.
So we now have a question from the audience, and it says, I was initially concerned that this measure would harm hunting and fishing, but after reading it, I'm not so sure. It sounds like it might benefit hunting and fishing opportunities. I'm asking your thoughts on how the measure will affect these concerns.
As someone who does not partake in either of those activities, I'm not sure. And I do think that if you are an individual, I can't think of how this might impact hunting and fishing one way or another. Yeah, so I don't really have an answer for that, but I will say that all these types of ambiguities about the measure is really what has struck so many of us as being problematic, just simply because it doesn't specify any kind of protections or impacts, carve outs or anything else like that. It is just pretty broad, and the definitions. I did want to just read directly from the measure, specific to the penalties, that any corporate, government or other business entity that impairs any of the rights set forth in this ordinance shall be subject to a civil penalty in the amount of 1% per day of the total cost of restoring the affected environment to its state before the impairment, from the time the impairment is reported to any government entity until the impairment is stopped. This 1% per day penalty is in addition to the cost of restoring the affected environment. So I think I believe that's how I had stated it, but if there was any misunderstanding, I just wanted to clarify that. That is the language from the measure.
The next question involves the.
Excuse me, do I get to respond to the fishing and hunting one? Yeah. So there is nothing in our measure that would change the ability of hunters and fishermen to do that activity, as they have been doing for, hundreds of years. What it does do is it makes that activity safer, okay, because the animals that are there hunting in the forest or in the watershed, and the fish that they're taking out of our streams would be clean and safe, okay? So the fish are in the water that is potentially being contaminated with all these aerial pesticides, and so are the deer and other animals that are hunted. And like I said, when those deer are found to have these gross tumors and birth defects, that says that they're out there eating the plants and animals that are in the areas that are sprayed. Had a friend who a lot of the meat that they ate was all hunted, and their son ended up with a pretty severe neurological condition, almost like a rare 1 in a million thing. I mean, you have to wonder if the meat you're eating is coming from the forest that's been sprayed. That's not great.
Oh, now I'm gonna ask my.
Oh, I have a little more time, so I'm gonna take it out. That was, so the other thing that, people come to our county, not the safety of hunting and fishing, but people come to our county to do these things because Lane County is beautiful. We have a wonderful outdoor environment. And when they come here, they spend money. And again, let's go back to the economics of this. People pay to do fishing trips. People pay, they stay in our hotels. It's a driver for us, and we should keep protecting that.
So I have an organizational question. We are close to time to finish. So I think we will now switch, even though we've got great questions, we'll now switch to the closing statements. And so since Tiffany was last, she'll be first. Yeah, first here.
All right, well, thanks so much, everybody. Thanks for listening. Thanks for being here. We really do appreciate it. Like I said, I think, I'm part of this coalition, and my organization is part of this coalition among many others. Specifically, not because of the intention behind this measure, that we all agree, we need to protect our water. We need to make sure it's clean, and because of the regulations and that are with us today, and the regulations that are followed, we actually have some of the cleanest drinking water in the country. And I've got an EWEB commissioner here that can speak to that. I do think that the concern is very specifically about the impacts that are much broader than that. Because when we're talking about lawsuits and we're talking about opening up a process that doesn't exist currently, you can't currently sue somebody over, building something, building a new housing structure or a new housing simply because of the impacts that they are how they're impacting the ground below it. This would create a path to do so, and we have seen the weaponization of the land use process. We have seen that it happens. Our legislature is actively working to try to undo some of that, because we know that the cost of housing and other projects that we do that tend to face litigation time after time, even though they do not end up in an ultimate decision that is in favor of those who bring forward these frivolous litigation, it is costly to our communities. And I think that is really the premise of why there is such great concern over how this would be, how people would take advantage of this pathway for folks to sue, simply because, if they don't like something, or if they have a problem with athletic fields or turf, because one way or another, that turf, whether it's artificial or natural, it needs to either be fertilized or it's doing some sort of impact to the environment. I think this is really about figuring out how we need to prioritize the enforcement of the laws that we have. That is incredibly important, but also recognizing that we have a lot of other community values that we need to move forward, and community development is a really important part of that. As folks from Springfield, Glenwood is a really important project that we've been looking forward to for years. It's been years in the making, and everything about that site would be potentially impact the watershed around it. So on behalf of the coalition, we respectfully ask for your no vote in May on this measure. And again, you can visit our website at protectourcounty.org for all the information and to join the coalition or help be part of that, and look forward to engaging with the community on this issue in the future. So thank you.
Great. Well, thank you. I just want to reiterate that this notion that there's going to be a vast number of frivolous lawsuits is really just not true. And the evidence from around the world shows us in the country on any place with citizen lawsuit, this is not the case. But if there's one thing I want you to take it away from today is this. Measure 20-373 exists because people in the county have spent years trying just about everything else first. People have testified, they've organized, they've written letters, they've met with the governor's staff, they've asked for stronger protections, and they've asked for the harms to stop. And yet still, people in Lane County are living with contaminated air, contaminated water, industrial clear cutting, aerial pesticide spraying, and many harms that are coming from treating our watersheds as sacrifice zones. So this measure is not a first step. It's what communities do when ordinary channels have failed to protect them. And after a discussion like this one, it's important to notice something else. Again and again, the opposition wants this conversation to be about fear of change, fear of legal questions, fear of what might happen if people in Lane County actually assert their right to protect the water they depend on. But that fear should be weighed against something real. Real watersheds are under stress. Real communities are facing pollution. And real climate pressures make clean, abundant water even more precious than it already is. The question before us is not whether the current system is working. We know it's not. The question is whether we're willing to say that in Lane County, the rights of watersheds and the rights of people to clean water and their health and safety matter more than the ability of powerful interests to keep doing harm. This measure is grounded in a simple moral idea. Water is not optional. Healthy watersheds are not optional. They are the foundation of life, community health, agriculture, local economies, and the future of this county. Our opposition would have you believe that we have to choose between a strong economy and a healthy environment. That is it's a false choice based on false and misleading claims, especially these legal ones. We can and must have both, but only if we protect the environment that sustains our health, our communities, and our future. If instead we continue propping up the broken system, sacrificing our ecosystems for the profits of mostly out-of-state interests, we're likely to end up with neither. And this is also a democracy question, okay? Who gets to decide what happens in Lane County? The people who live here and bear the consequences, or out-of-state corporations and out-of-state political interests that profit while our local communities absorb the damage? Measure 20-373 says that our watersheds matter. It says our communities matter, and it says that when higher systems fail to protect the essentials of life, the people still have a right and a responsibility to act. I hope you will look past the fear, look at the reality, and stand for clean water, living watersheds, and the right of this community to protect itself. Please vote yes on Measure 20-373.
So let's thank we've already thanked our presenters. And I want to thank you for the very thoughtful questions that the audience has provided. I thank you for your attention to this, because I've watched your faces, and people are very concerned about this and very thoughtful. So thank you very much for coming. And does the Springfield City Club want to say something?
Yes, I wanted to say thank you to everybody coming today. I really appreciate it. Thank you to Tiffany and Rob for being here and presenting on this topic, both sides. That's what we're here. We're also a nonpartisan group, but we want to hear from both sides, and we appreciate your time. We have a next forum coming up. It's tentatively scheduled for Thursday, April 2nd. We may have to reschedule it, but it's the East Lane County Commissioner candidates race. And so we're trying to nail down, get all three of them. I think it's 3 candidates, is that right?
Yes.
Here on the same day. So if you're not on our email list and you want to make sure you hear that date, we encourage you to sign up on our fluorescent green forms, and we will make sure you get that. It's supposed to be right back here in this room. April 2nd is the tentative date, but again, we may have to schedule it, so make sure you're on our email list to get the final date. And Len, do you have anything else to
Yeah,
add?
a couple of details. First of all, whether you're opposed or in support of the measure, the text is on the counter there. So please feel free to take a copy of it. Secondly, we will be emailing out the full slide presentations of both parties, probably tomorrow. And by tomorrow, at some point, this entire conversation will be available on the Springfield City Club YouTube page. So please feel free to tell everyone you know to go look at the YouTube page, and you'll be able to see the full presentation.
Thank you, Len. And thank you to Nancy, and I'm sorry, Patty for helping facilitate today's discussion. So thank you. All right.